I'm a sucker for history, how Kansas City came about. And growing up as a kid, I used to come down here to the stockyards and I'd go to the American Royal. It just becomes a part of you as a Kansas Citian.
All right, we're trying something new here on Manufacturing Happy Hour today. It's impossible to explore what manufacturing really means to a community without looking at that community's history. We're going to be diving into the West Bottoms. We're going to look at where Kansas City started and what the industrial world means to this city. I think first and foremost, cheers.
Hey.
Scott, thanks for jumping on Manufacturing Happy Hour.
Thanks, Chris, for having me.
I think the first question I have to ask is, tell us about this very unique bar that we're hanging out in called The Ship. Describe it for people that might not be watching the video. They're listening to this on audio right now.
Well, this was, way back when, one of the industrial buildings down here, like a lot of these old brick and timber buildings. And this was maybe 10 years ago. Bob and Josh, who are the proprietors here, they could give you a lot more history on it. But
sure.
There's a gentleman by the name of Adam Jones. And Adam Jones, when the Ship, which was originally downtown, closed up shop, he salvaged all of the innards of the Ship and stored them away until the opportunity arose to recreate the Ship. And so he and Bob and Josh and others did what you see here. It started off with the bar and the cafe next door, and then during COVID they expanded it here to this music venue as well.
Spread it out a little bit.
That's right.
It feels cavernous is the wrong word for it. It's just it's expansive. Like we didn't know, at least I didn't, as a newbie to this area, did not know this room exists when I first walked into the bar yesterday, which I think The Ship is a perfectly appropriate title for this spot because it literally does feel like you're inside of a boat right now. So, super cool spot. Now, one thing I have to ask is, as we're exploring Kansas City and manufacturing in this area, I don't feel like you can really talk about manufacturing in Kansas City's industrial community without talking about West Bottoms. Do you think that's a fair statement?
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, this is where the city began. Little history on the city of Kansas City. Before Kansas City came about, this area what we're in now is known as the French Bottoms, and located at the confluence of the Kansas and Missouri River. It was a natural place of trade, and people were using the river at that time. And so, be it commerce or entertainment or livelihood, it all came from the rivers. So this area here was a natural to develop Kansas City, and where it really came about was when the railroads decided to have a hub here in Kansas City. And it started with the Kansas City Pacific Railway and the Missouri Pacific Railway, originating from here, and that was like in 1865. There were buildings built, and there was still a community here prior to that time where barges would come along, and they would, because the Missouri River is so fast, they would come along and around the bend and have to go about a half mile down the river to a port. It was called Town of Kansas, in the town of Kansas. So they would stop off there, and then they would walk over to the West Bottoms area. And so that's how it kind of all got started. But when the railway came through then, it became a natural place for agriculture. And back then, so you had all of this industry like John Deere and like Molina, the plow company, tractors, plows, anything having to do with agricultural manufacturing this was the heart, because again, of its location, it's so flat, so it's a good distribution hub, but Also, just because there's a lot of agriculture around the Kansas City area. So
Yeah, so a river town, right?
Yes.
Natural confluence of the Kansas and Missouri rivers. I'm going to be keeping track of the timeline here. So 1865 is when you said the railway came in here, correct?
yes, and then it kind of evolved. The railway itself did. Of course, you had the Civil War, but afterwards they had the Hannibal Junction, which is the first bridge that went across the Missouri River and connected the east and the west sides of the river. And so it allowed expansion to the east as well. And at about the same time is when they created the Union Depot. And the Union Depot was the second depot, is known as the Insane Asylum. And it was a monstrous facility. And that's when it sparked other rail involvement as well, both, not only commercial but also passenger. And it was just that was really what kicked it off. And obviously, being a hub for agriculture, and then not far behind that came the stockyards.
Yep.
And so in the late 1800s, the stockyards came along, and it was Kansas City and it was Chicago. Those were basically the two hubs. And in fact, Kansas City and Chicago are still the main two hubs for rail traffic in the United States.
So you hear about Chicago all the time as a main railway hub. You don't hear about Kansas City as much. Why is that?
Maybe Kansas City's just a little bit lower keyed, but as far as volume, it is the number one railway yard in the United States. A lot of that has to do with the fact that a lot of coal comes through here as well. But as far as number of trains, train traffic is the number two behind Chicago. But it's location. It's at the confluence of the two rivers. It's in the middle of the United States, and so it was a natural for the railways.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And I did want to ask you about livestock, because Kansas City has an incredible history around livestock.
You bet.
What role did West Bottoms play in the cattle exchange? I mean, the livestock market was just an institution here. You can still see the old Kansas City Livestock Exchange building that's been repurposed today down here.
Well, that is actually the second livestock exchange building. And the first livestock exchange building was on the Kansas side. And that was actually torn down because they say there was taxing issues. They were taxing the hooves of cattle, a hoof tax. And so Missouri didn't have that. Kansas did. So then they moved the livestock exchange building from the Kansas side over to the Missouri side, to Genesee Street, where it is now. To back up a little bit, Kansas City in the West Bottoms is kind of unique in that most state boundaries, they might be defined by rivers. Well, in Kansas City, it's not so. You'd think naturally that the Kansas River, which abuts the west side of the West Bottoms, would be the state line.
Right, it's
but
not.
the state line goes right through Kansas and Missouri. So, yeah, there's a lot of little quirks about the West Bottoms.
Do you feel, because in this series we're exploring a lot on the food and beverage scene in Kansas City, from barbecue to manufacturing, the equipment goes through it. Do you feel having, let's say, this cattle exchange hub of basically of the West, correct? Like, this is where you went for the exchange before you traveled out into the great yonder at that point. Do you feel like that had an impact on what Kansas City is today?
Oh, certainly so. The stockyards, they brought about thousands and thousands of people, employees, and it created the Strawberry Hill, which is on the bluff to the west in Kansas City, Kansas, and obviously people that lived here in the West Bottoms. Back in 1895, 90% of the entire value of Kansas City was located here in the West Bottoms. And the West Bottoms, it consisted of not only industry, but also supporting manufacturing as well, not just agricultural industry or stockyards. And so you had a lot of people that needed to live either down here or around here. So it really was the impetus for the growth of Kansas City
Yeah.
as a whole.
This is where it all was back then. The
Yeah.
industry, the people, all of it was here in West Bottoms. What remnants of that industry being right here in central Kansas City, as it was back then, do we still feel today?
Well, again, as a result of the livestock exchange and the cattle business, there's off-spins of that, more the social side of it. For instance, the American Royal, where they would have cattle shows and horse shows.
You're good. That's exactly what I was going to ask you about next, actually. Describe
read your mind.
Yeah, describe the American Royal as if, for someone that's never heard of this before, because I had heard of it, I had just forgotten I'd known what it was. But this is like the livestock and barbecue show, isn't it?
Yes, and it used to be here in the West Bottoms, and since it's now moved out to Kansas City, Kansas, out to the
Speedway,
Speedway out there. Yeah, but it still is, I think, the largest barbecue show, and in Kansas City being the capital of barbecue, there might be folks in Texas or in Memphis that say, no, ours is best, but I've been to both places, and I might have a natural bias, but not really. It's just it's second to none, Kansas City barbecue, and so American Royal obviously has an off spin of that in the American Royal barbecue contest, where you would have hundreds of entrants to this, and it was just a big party for 3 days, and with bands, with music, obviously a lot of food.
Mm-hmm.
It was really a great way to celebrate Kansas City and celebrate the West Bottoms heritage and the livestock business. So,
well, I want to ask then, because I think I was just learning this as well. I feel like I had heard in the past that the Kansas City Royals were named what they were because of Hallmark, for example, being headquartered here, Crown Town, etc. But is the correct,
or the American Royal
that's
as
what
well.
That's what I heard. I thought I was learning. I feel like I was seeing more information telling me no, it's actually named after the American Royal. So which is it as a local?
As a local, I would say the American Royal. The American Royal was here prior to Crown Center, and the American Royal was in an old, much like this, a brick and timber type of building. It became a little rickety over the years, and they tore it down when they built Kemper Arena.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where they played hockey. That's where they had a lot of the shows and the events until American Royal was built.
Oh yeah.
So that really, the history, to celebrate the history of Kansas City as kind of a cattle town, it's American Royal, and so I think the Royals built on that. But again, the Crown thing was just a natural, the Royal and Crown Center and the Hall family and all that they've done. So it all is simpatico.
Yeah, it all blends together. To your point about barbecue, we've been getting to know Kansas City barbecue while we're here, and to defend your point that this is the best barbecue, we were reading an article that was posted on the wall at Joe's Kansas City Barbecue last night, featuring 13 places you need to eat before you die. I believe that's what it was called. And it was written by Anthony Bourdain. And the last one on the list was Joe's Kansas City Barbecue. And I believe the line said, it's the best barbecue in Kansas City. And as a result, that means it's the best barbecue in the world. I'm probably not quoting this perfectly, but that's what I took away from that article.
Start talking about barbecue, I could talk for hours. But, and as like a parent with children, you can't really say, hey, which one's the best, right? I guess I have my favorites. I lean towards Joe's. I probably go there every 2 or 3 weeks and grab some barbecue, but there's great ones too. Like Q39 is another very, very good barbecue place. But it's nice to be in a town that offers up such great food.
I won't pick favorites either. I know everyone. I think what I like about Kansas City is everyone does have their favorites, but I can't really name a lot of lists that look the same. I feel like you talk to someone, you're going to get a different number 1, number 2, number 3, which I think is a testament to how good it is.
It's consistent, exactly.
Yeah.
It really is good.
A different topic I want to ask you about that I learned while I was doing my own research on West Bottoms yesterday was haunted houses. There are a number of, let's say, famous haunted houses, like the ones that you see pop up around Halloween time that take over warehouses, or sometimes they just do it in a big field or wherever it is, right? But I got the impression that that trend kind of originated here in the West Bottoms.
That was a result. They were originally, Monty and Amber and Full Moon Productions, they were originally up in downtown Kansas City. In downtown Kansas City, again, it was kind of going through a period of neglect, and then they started improving everything in downtown. And so some of the businesses, including the haunted house that was there, had to find someplace else to go. And the West Bottoms, again, was kind of a spooky place back when they started.
Yeah. What year was this? Just so we're keeping the timeline going.
Oh, I'm not sure. Again, talking with Monty and Amber, it would have been in the late 1990s, probably mid 1990s. Okay. And anyway, and there was the Bottoms had been neglected because of one, the stockyards, and people didn't really like the smell of the stockyards, and they kind of stayed away from the stockyards. But it was the interstate commerce system and the interstates that went over the West Bottoms. They didn't go through the West Bottoms, and as a result, people could drive by and not go into, and there weren't a lot of places of egress from the Bottoms. And so the building stock down here, beautiful, beautiful building stock, it was like next to nothing. So it was easy to find a deal down here, and because it was kind of neglected and forgot about as a natural for haunted houses. And
sure.
And they started, I believe it was with the Beast, but then the Edge of Hell, and there's a couple others that they had put together. Again, until a higher and better use came along, and there's a group called Samara Road out of back east that are now developing a lot of that portion of the West Bottoms that where the haunted houses used to be. More, residential, retail, commercial, entertainment. That's what the West Bottoms has kind of evolved into.
I mean, I'm a city slicker. Anyone that knows me will tell you that. So I love kind of seeing the evolution. I don't want to say I like the rise and fall of these areas, but it's part of kind of the rebirth of these spots. My question is, what's here in West Bottoms now? What's the highlight reel? I think this might have been when months ago you and I were talking about this. I think you rattled off a ton of cool stuff that's down here that I think is a testament to just this, what's become a pretty interesting mixed-use area.
And it's a great point. Like I say, in 1895, it was really a mixed-use area. Then it became, pretty much just industry and distribution, again, because of its location. And now, because of the cool building stock, and it's just a great place to be. It's kind of coming about where you're having a lot of residents now in the Bottoms. You've got the yards down there on the south side, and what Samara Road is doing, and then MCM Realty, what they're doing over on 9th Street, and so there's thousands of units that are built and are being built, and so you'll still see a lot of growth with residential, and as a result of that, the need for support businesses and the need for entertainment. So you see a lot more bars pop up, just like the ship here. And then the industry side of it, it's not heavy industry. It's more light. It's the breweries. It's West Bottoms whiskey that is not far from here.
We walked by that on the way here, actually.
Oh, yeah. Good stuff. I bottled a few bottles and drank a few bottles as well.
Oh, really? What do you mean you've bottled a few bottles? Tell us a bit more about this.
Occasionally they'll need some help. So will you come in and help us bottle up some whiskey? And so you'll spend a morning or an afternoon putting on labels and filling the bottles and
maybe having a pour
putting
or two in the
cork,
process as
a pour
well.
or two in the process, and they're great people, great hosts.
So my next question then, I think this is applicable to anyone listening to this anywhere. How is this a model, what's gone on down here in West Bottoms? What can other cities that are revitalizing an area, a mixed-use area in particular, what can they learn from West Bottoms?
One, you don't give up on an area, like I say, because it goes into blight, it goes into neglect, some decay. It's again location, and if you have the people there, and it's cool that it will come about. Now, true, you need a lot of infrastructure work to do, and that's the key to revitalization of any area is the infrastructure. So you're talking about roads, bridges, viaducts here in the West Bottoms. You're talking about storm sewers and water lines and electricity and all of that. I mean, it all plays into making the area suitable for development, and that's kind of the key to any area.
And I like how you highlighted some of the, I'll call it artisanal manufacturing in the area, but there's still more significant manufacturing here as well. For example, you've been very involved in this group, I believe. Faultless Starch manufactures most of the world's spray starch, correct? And they're here.
The Faultless Brands, Faultless Brands. I was general counsel for Faultless Brands for 20 years, and they started here in the West Bottoms in 1887. Now, back then, they didn't have aerosol starch. It was box starch. And there's, again, we were talking about, it's one of those ancillary manufacturing businesses that kind of supported the growth of the area, the residents that are coming in here, the hotels that were servicing the businessmen that were coming into Kansas City. And so starch and other products that be suitable, soaps and everything for the hotel group, and so it then expanded out to the retail side of things, and then Gordon Beam had the foresight to see the opportunity in aerosol and using the aerosol to expand it into spray starch, and that's when things took off, and then acquired a few of the other starch companies such as Magic, such as Niagara, and so like I say, it makes about 90% of the world's spray starch. But at one time, they also manufactured Bon Ami cleanser. Never hasn't scratched yet type of thing. And then there were other businesses of Faultless, such as high-end candles with Trapp and Company, and the Garden Weasel and stuff. So it's still it manufactured a lot of different consumer products here in the Bottoms, but the only one that remains today, to my knowledge, is still the spray starch, and it's still manufactured here in Kansas City.
Yeah. I just think it's because that's what you put on clothes when you're ironing them and things
Exactly.
like that. And like to think that the majority of that in the world comes from not only Kansas City, but this area of Kansas City, I think is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It is that and laundry aids. Obviously, if you have starch, it's you got to diversify, right? So you get into other type of laundry aids as well in that business.
I have a few more questions here as we wrap our conversation. Next one's a personal question. Why do you personally feel it's so important to preserve places like West Bottoms in cities like Kansas City?
I'm a sucker for history, but also recognize really how Kansas City came about, and really the roots of Kansas City, an area that I love dearly. And growing up as a kid, I used to come down here to the stockyards, and I'd go to the American Royal, or I'd have at the Livestock Exchange building when they're selling cattle. I would go through and get a sandwich there and watch them auction off cattle.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just becomes a part of you as a Kansas Cityan. And in the West Bottoms, again, it's very, very, very cool area, being at the confluence of the two rivers, and just kind of like how Kansas City, we were talking about, it was a mixed-use area back in 1895 with residents and churches and city hall and the Union Depot and everything else, all the industry, and the trains and the light rail that would go through here. And that all kind of went away, and then it's all kind of coming back now because, again, highest and best use, you don't see the heavy industry as much anymore.
In this particular area.
This particular area. But the area itself is coming about full circle. And just in my side of it, and from the personal side of it, I see what Kansas City was before Kansas City was here. It was a river town. It was at the confluence of the two. It was the French Bottoms. Knowing that the rivers haven't moved, the rivers are still here, and the area is still here, and what could be done, and to see Kansas City again as this river town. And so my passion is to see that happen. And that's like with the Rock Island Bridge, which is a fantastic project that's over the Kansas River. It's an old railroad bridge over 700 feet long. And what they've done is they've cantilevered out the sides on the side and put a second level deck cantilevered out and put bars and restaurants and event centers on that bridge. And that's going to be opening up here later this summer.
Very
but it
cool.
also connects, again,
the trail
people,
systems.
the trail systems, all the trail systems on the Missouri side with the trail systems on the Kansas side. So, for instance, you could bike from Topeka or Lawrence all the way to St. Louis, via the Katy Trail. But also the connectivity, it draws attention to the rivers. Being over the river. And so you'll see activation of the Kansas River and to see people, again, embrace the fact that we are a river town.
I think what's interesting, being able to see everything we've talked about in this series, this area is like a connection point. You're literally talking about connection points, bringing the trails together, where the rivers come together. And I think we see a lot of connection in the industrial community here in Kansas City as well. That's what I've seen from just the collaborative nature of the manufacturers we've talked to, at least. Let's end on something fun
Sure.
as we wrap our West Bottoms part of the conversation. If we're going to spend an evening out in West Bottoms, take us on a little food and beverage crawl here. We've named a couple, but I know there are some other iconic spots around here. Let's say you come here, you start with a drink at the Ship. Where do you go after that to grab a bite?
Oh, there's many places that have opened up that you can grab a drink at the campgrounds or the Stockyards Brewery or the Golden Ox, which is on the south side closer to Kemper, which is now known as Hy-Vee Arena. Or around this area, Fuego is a very unique place. It has a lot of the feel of the Ship here as well. There's many other places too, some that I haven't had an opportunity to get to yet. I've been kind of removed here the last year or so from the entertainment side of it, but
Sure.
I hear people talk about, again, my senior moment here that I can't remember all of the venues, but there's quite a few restaurants and bars down this way that are just simple little things on the side of the road, like Lunchbox that serves a great sandwich or greasy burger, if you like.
Yeah, I think it was at this is a different area of town, but at KC Beer Co. earlier, they were saying, hey, one of the best burgers you'll find in Kansas City is over at Campground, and the Golden Ox, I believe, is a Kansas City institution for steak. Like, that's not a Johnny come lately. That's been here forever.
Golden Ox has been here as long as I can remember, since I was born, and in the Livestock Exchange building. and no, it's great. And then obviously areas around Kansas City too, like just over the Kansas River, there's a place called Slaps Barbecue, and you talk about slaps. That's probably Mike and Joe Pierce, those guys, they unbelievable barbecue, and that's in my top three. I can't say favorites again,
Sure,
but I
right.
at least
you can
put
have
it.
a top list.
Yeah, I have a top list.
Yeah, so your list of top, you're the second person to mention slaps in less than 24 hours. So I guess I need to go have their ribs pretty soon before I get out of here. So, last question, I think. I'm probably lying, but maybe second to last question.
Yeah, just whatever. I'm not quite done with my beer.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. So is Kansas City and West Bottoms more specifically? Is it having a moment right now? Is it going through a renaissance? What's your take?
The Renaissance started again after the 1998 General Alarm Fire, and the commitment by the city, by the state, by the federal government to improve the infrastructure down here. That infrastructure improvement is still ongoing, but a lot has been done. And so you see different waves of speculation, like we talked about before with the haunted houses. You could buy a building down here for next to nothing back in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And then people would buy and hold, and then, 5-6 years later, they have another deal that maybe the prices are a little bit up, and now it's getting to the point that people aren't speculating. They're buying, or they're moving in their businesses, leasing or whatever, because they have an intention of living or of working down here and running their business down here. So, but it's the growth is there. It's great to see it happen, and a lot of it's happening organically too. Some of it, you can't help but be pushed a little bit, but a lot of it comes from within.
Well, I can say I've been enjoying my time exploring Kansas City. I feel a good vibe in this city when I come to. Like, I think you can get a sense when you go to a particular spot, like, is it on the rise? Is it in a slump? Kansas City definitely feels like a spot on the rise right now.
Yes, most definitely. And back when we used to have football games here that would be shown on Monday Night Football, the blimp would show Arrowhead Stadium, or they might show the Plaza, which is a great shopping area. But and then I have a little running bet with the old city manager that I said, hey, but by 10 years from now, all the blimps are going to be focusing on the West Bottoms, and I really truly think that, especially with what's going on with the Rock Island Bridge and the development of the entertainment district, and not only there but in the Samara Road, what they're planning here around here. But yeah, it's got a lot of great history. It's got a great future.
And one thing I do have to ask you about, because I discovered you when I was looking up the Kansas City Industrial Council. I have to ask what that is, because especially for a manufacturing podcast, that feels like something folks should know about. What is the Kansas City Industrial Council?
Kansas City Industrial Council is comprised of 6 industrial districts, and the Central Industrial District Association, which is what the Historic West Bottoms, that's the doing business as Historic West Bottoms Association. It's really the Central Industrial District Association. And that was formed back in 1926. And there's others like the Blue Valley, the Northeast Industrial Association. So Kansas City Industrial Association represents all 6 of those industrial districts. And they're very, very key in the development of infrastructure, such as the roads, the bridges, the viaducts, and also even bigger projects. And they were instrumental in having the levees redone here in Kansas City and West Bottoms, which again led to the attention and the betterments or the improvements of those levees to be a catalyst for economic development as well.
Very cool. Well, hey, this has been a fun conversation going through history, talking about the different purposes and repurposing of West Bottoms, and I think a great foundation for our exploration of Kansas City manufacturing. So with that, Scott, I just want to say cheers and thank you for jumping on the show.
Thanks for having me, Chris.